Greetings! It is I, Tentis Dracovin, your Lord Emperor, here at the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. If you're joining me on YouTube, hi there YouTube. If you're joining me live on Twitch, hi Twitch. Anyway, today, I'm of course diving deeper into the Sixth World, to Shadowrun. I've talked about doing more country-based tours, where I give a history and information about places in the world you can visit. There are plenty of nations which I can talk about. But I decided what I'm going to do is I'm going to go continent by continent and give you basic information about all the nations on that continent, and then go deeper into depths into some of these later on in the future. That's how we're going to go about it. So we're going to start today, of course, with North America. Because, well, North America is a big center point for a lot of what's happened in the Shadowrun world. It isn't the only place. There are plenty other places in the world that have had effects because of, you know, magic coming back and stuff. But a big history of the rise of megacorps, the rise of and fall of the United States. These are big major events that do kind of hit because a lot of material in the Shadowrun world is based out of North America. It's published in North America mainly. You know, originally spread worldwide. I'm sure you can play it in other places in the world now. And there are, you know, information on those. But also, I'm from North America. So, I mean, it's the place I kind of live in. It makes sense to start there. So, I'm just going to go through the list of nations here. And I have done my UCAS, United Canadian American States, video, which dove very much into depth in that. But we're going to start with showing off this map. I'm going to show off a few maps to start off with before we go into depths about the country. This is the 2075 map. And this one does reflect, it shows a lot of old boundaries for things like states and stuff in the white. It shows up a lot of the major nations as they are now. And we're going to talk about a bunch of these nations here too. There are still some areas, some problems, things have changed a lot. There will be a little bit of a animated thing that I'll have to refresh here to show off. But if we want to take a little bit of the color away, a little bit simpler of a map, this one is not... unfortunately, it's kind of like off-kilter the way it presents itself. Will it fix itself? Let's see if I can fix this video one here. I didn't think about it before, but maybe I can get a better version of it. But, just give me a second here, too. Mess around with some stuff and see if I can fix it up a little bit. No, that aligns it really weird. Let's just do this here. That'll be good. I can fix this to a degree. It will be better, not perfect. But we'll move off of this one in a second. So there are a number of sources for looking this up. I didn't give a full list of the sources. I'll talk about them. There's a little bit of a better picture of it here. So there you go. And of course we will talk about this here, which is I'll put this one on right now as I talk about the books. This is a time lapse of the national changes and stuff. So this is a really cool thing I found online. I'd recommend checking it out. So the unfortunate thing when it comes to North America is each of these places you have to specifically look up a book for it. A lot of these things, some of them have their own books from the various different editions. I guess when I talk about some of these, I will mention that, but there isn't a really great source overall. And today, since I'm only using some basic information to review some stuff, I'm actually just using mostly the Shadowrun Wikipedia. We're just going to basically doing a basic tour. The in-depth nation things that I'll talk about, I can list the ones I am planning on now.
Citizen of the Empire.
Thanks, Worm, for the resubscription. It echoed probably because of my, I don't have my headphones plugged in to cut that. So I'll do that just in case someone else does like a subscription or something. It doesn't get picked up an echo in my microphone. There we go. That should take care of that. Anyway, I'm planning on going more in depth into Aztlan, the California Free State, the Confederate of America States, the Front Range Free Zone, aka Denver, the Pueblo Corporate Council, and Tarnagir. Those nations, out of all the other ones, and you know, I've already talked about the UCS, those 6 have a very deep history, have a lot of history, and are, I feel like should have videos on their own. So we will go over those. As you continue to enjoy this historical thing, we've reached what? Did it repeat or did it end? No, it's going slowly. Very slowly. Anyway. As much as I enjoy this, we should definitely dive deep into her. Refresh chat. Is it working now? Issues! Yay! So you can see definitely, like, there's been a lot of changes, and this goes to about 2070, and as soon as this, like, completes, we'll dive into the nations. I like this thing here. I think it's working now. Judging that the current timeline is 2075, there is a lot of stuff to talk about. So you can, Newfoundland breaking away there, and this was before Canada joined with the U.S., the Caribbean League forming their own nation. Again, this is a great time lapse, I think, this thing here. This shows a lot of the changes and problems that have happened over the last 75 years. There's the Canadian merger. There's the Confederation of American States breaking away. So we reached 2034. There's all the areas that have been established because of that shift. Southern Florida and Miami joining the Caribbean League. Territory gig. We'll talk about that. 68 months long. That's an impressive amount. Again, I want to kind of go through and let this play here. Because, again, when I found this, I'm like, this is really nice for showing off. I don't know if they've got this for any other nations, unfortunately. But it does give a good example of what we'll be talking about today with a lot of these things. And how things have broken apart in a lot. Like, even the Native American nations have had their issues. And have had their splits from each other. And some have gone on their own way. Some have remained part of the council that is the Native American nations. And certainly others have things like merged together because of various issues. Yep. That's California getting a free state. There's the Tamashin Nation withdrawing from the NAN. I'll be talking about them. I'll be talking about the Algonquin Manitou Council, too. They've had some things. This is actually, I ended up getting this on the, if you look up Shadowrun North America and go to the wiki site for that, this has this on there. I don't know where they put it up uploaded it for the wiki, but this was the major thing that I thought was the best for showing off North America here. That's kind of why I want to show it and just sort of talk with it, but like, and I'll go over some more stuff from a lot of these things. Again, we're not looking to go super in-depth today. We're looking to just go over some basics that you understand what's going on here. And there are some aces like the Yucatan Peninsula, which is now its autonomous state. We don't know a lot about it. We know it broke away from Aslan, sort of, but we don't know a full thing about it. Then they become a protectorate and part of the NAN again. The Ute nation absorbed by the Pueblo Corporate Council, so one of the nations disappears there. The earthquake zone there, and a lot of the problems in California. So we're getting to the 2070s here, and so there's still a few things going on. And the Pueblo Council taking a bit of the California Free State. California suffered pretty heavily. And then I think we've reached the end at 2072 where this ends. And it's technically 2075 if we're talking 6th edition, which is just a little farther ahead. But that's that there. Let's start talking about these nations one at a time, because we gotta dive into a bunch of these. And again, some of these I will go more in depth. We're gonna go more in depth about this nation here, Aztlan. Aztlan is now most of Central America. So it was just originally Mexico. It is a renamed Mexico is basically what happened. Is the major political party that now controls it, the Aslan Party, basically backed by technology, the mega corporation, took control of the nation and renamed it. I believe I can tell you... There is an entire history that we would want to talk about. I think there's a nation that we'll go more into depth about. But effectively, they've been a very aggressive nation. Since they became basically a country that is directly backed and controlled by a mega corporation, they have found themselves in a position, in comparison to many other nations, where there's a lot more power behind it. Things like the 2040s, where they invaded Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, El Salvador, Nicaragua, basically annexed all of those, and a big, and even annexed Panama. The fact is, because they were advancing much more than a lot of other Central America, this was a very good excuse for them to basically become this powerful nation. They were powerful. That's the kind of the best way to say it, is they were powerful. They made themselves powerful. They used corporate control to make themselves an incredibly powerful, basically national and corporate army. They kind of are one and the same in a way. They're technically separate, but it's a technicality that the two armies of the national army and the corporate army are technically separate. But we'll definitely go into more depth about this nation here and its history, and a lot of things that have happened during it, because it is a very interesting one. It reflects one of the major mega corporations, and the thing is, part of its the Panama Canal zones under the corporate court. It borders with the CS, the Pueblo, and Amazonia, and it's constantly at odds with all of them. So it makes Central America a very hostile, volatile area. While the nation, I will note, is actually incredibly progressive in comparison to many other places in the world. That's the thing, is they have a caste system that is, in and amongst the caste system, you do have higher social standing depending on your metatype. But in general, metatype or skin color aren't really big importance, In UCS, they'd take note of your metatype, then your skin color, because there's still old racism in a lot of places, unfortunately. That still tend to exist, just because now there's elves, trolls, and dwarves to kind of have people hate. There's still a lot of old hatreds around for various people, and a lot of misconceptions and stuff like that. Here, it's your cultural groups. There are 3 cultural groups, and depending on what cultural group you are, is your standing in the nation. Also, things like free spirits, dracoforms, and shapeshifters are welcomed in Aslan. The most dracoforms are feathered serpents there, and there's a lot of them. They give citizenship to free spirits, and if you banish a free spirit, it's considered homicide under their law. That's hugely... They even welcome infected, people that have been hit with various issues, like vampires and stuff like that. They have uses for them. Also because they brought back a lot of... They did kind of join with the Native American nations and bring back a lot of the old Aztec ways. There's technically some blood rituals that exist now. They don't do a lot of... They don't really do actual human sacrifice anymore, but, they bringing back a lot of old Aztec ways meant bringing back blood rituals in a lot of ways, and a reemergence of actual Aztec culture as a forefront was very important to the nation. So that's Aslan, and we're going to talk about them a lot more in the future. But we do want to talk about this map. This is as small as it was. Some of these flags are very small. This is the California Free State. So California has been hit with so much goddamn stuff in its history. Really, all they have left is San Francisco and Sacramento. San Diego was annexed by Aslan. around their independence declaration. Los Angeles was annexed by the Pueblo Council in 2061. So, when the Treaty of Denver was signed, California was still part of the U.S., but it wasn't getting a lot of aid. It wasn't getting a lot of help. It's basically on the other side. It's a disconnected place, and in 2036 they become a free nation. Again, I'm going to talk about this in more depth, but a lot of stuff has happened over the years, and California, to its neighbors, to invasions, to threats from the outside, has managed to keep some of itself, but lost a lot of its territory to its neighbors, basically invading and taking over things during a lot of the stable areas and stuff, like unstable time periods. And it's just... it's doing its best, but as its own nation, just because of a lot of threats around it, it's just pretty bad. And, there are plenty of things to talk about when it comes to the California Free State. Another reason I do want to dive deep into this one on its own in the future, and we will. Now, one that I'm not going to dive deeper into, because we do know a little bit about this one, but we're just going to go over today, is the Caribbean Free League. Because this is in the Caribbean, and the thing is, the Caribbean Free League formed out of a combination of things. First was VTAS, the global plague I talked about in my history of the first world, the sixth world. It killed about 4 million in the Caribbean. Most of it was the younger people under the age of 17. So, effectively, this huge generation of people was lost in the Caribbean. For that reasons, when UGE, when basically elves and dwarfs were being born, honestly, people were just happy that we had children there. In 2014, Fidel Castro stepped down. The Cuban government kind of fell apart. Mafia was taking over in Cuba, and the chaos. When Lady Guadalupe Martinez basically had this new revolution of neo-communist ideas and had a bloodless revolution that removed the Mafia from their control over Cuba. In 2022, because then there's a lot of corporate pressure on the islands, the Caribbean League was formed. And majority of the Caribbean islands are under the Caribbean League. Now, not all of them. I can say that there are a few that I can mention. Bahamas and Barbados are still under British government. They're still overseas territories, so they're not part of the League. Which does mean that the Caribbean League does have relations with both Britain and also Germany for some old reasons. Puerto Rico succeeded from the U.S. in 2032, joined the Caribbean League. It is now Bornican. South Florida joined it in 2034. Lady Guadalupe stepped down from the president control in 2046, gave it to her son. Then there was a lot of things going on with a lot of difficulty that really came about because when Dunkelzane died, as part of his will, he left a year's worth of dragon nails clippings to the current, basically, head of the Caribbean League. There was a lot of fighting to figure out who was really the head of it and who would get this thing here. Technically speaking, it wasn't until 2072 the actual Draco Foundation tried to send the Talons, but they were also then sunk at sea in a freak and possibly magically induced storm. To summarize, there was basically two fronts battling for this out. There was a person, Justin Rochefort was one side, who got killed, and then Marcus Cross took over. Marcus Cross was then arrested for necromancy. Then there was a splinter group under Michael Claude Faubert. Ray Martinez wins the presidency after Enrique Martinez, the son of the first person, fell to death and drowned, basically after his uncle. So this is the nephew, the grandnephew of the original person that helped found the Caribbean League. Cross and Flaubert, Flaubert being another person that's I think I helped break the splinter group of like the control over this area. The major political organizations had a conflict in Trinidad, a magical duel, Cross won, and then the organization gets reunited in the 2070s. Michael Cross was leader of the Voice of Ogden, and basically the person that was going to get the toenails. There we go. And then in 2074, in August, a major hurricane, Hurricane Donald, and one of the Great Western Dragons, Sirug, both land in Bornakin, the former area that was Puerto Rico. Devastate a nat vat facility there and seriously damage a lot. A natural vat food technologies, which is a subsidiary of AS Technology, destroy that there and do a lot of damage to the island itself. A hurricane and a dragon. Not great things to have together. So, the Caribbean League, which includes South Florida and the Miami Sprawl, the Puerto Rico, the Bahamas, not Bermuda and Barbados, remember, Cuba, Cayman Islands, Jamaica, Haiti, Dominican Republic, Virgin Islands, Antigua, St. Kitts and Nevis, Antigua and Barbuda, Guadalupe, Dominica, Martinique, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenada, Trinidad and Tobago, Aruba, Netherlands, Antilles, and Curacao are all there. So, the southern state of southern Florida, which joined the Caribbean League, consists of Miami-Dade County, Monroe County, eastern edge of Broward County, and the southern east edge of Collier County, and southeastern corner of Palm Beach County, including Boca Raton, but not West Palm Beach. So basically, the population of Miami has died off because there were a lot of retirees. They died. And not a lot of people are moving there now because it's another nation. So, you know, Miami is still a pretty major area in that place. Tourism comes there by a lot. And the Everglades are still there to a good chunk, though magically Evergladed. A lot of gator shamans are in that area, too. But that's the Caribbean League on a little basics there. Again, I don't want to go into too many details about this. This is about as much as we know about the Caribbean League. It's an unfortunate thing that some nations like this one... Oh, sorry, I didn't change the Caribbean League thing there. I'll have to make notes that I switched the Caribbean League. That I will have to remember that. Where's my notes? I remember I didn't change the flag right away. Because I'll have to make notes of that for a few... That's future me problem. So they're basically a loose confederation. Most of the islands still have technically independent governments. It's just sort of like... almost closer to like the European Union. Crocs do it, everybody. I mean, they kind of do that now. So I would consider the Caribbean League closer to something like the European Union. They united together into one kind of pseudo-group government that basically allows them to resist influence from, well, megacorps. Each individual island is weak. Together, they're, as a big whole, powerful. And again, it's a lot more independent than, like, the United States when it comes to these independent places, but they still connect together. And it's a very interesting amalgamation. Now, another one that we will be doing more in depth in the future is, of course, and is very tiny, again, sorry about the tiny flags, best I could find, the Confederation of America States. I've talked about them a little bit in some of my Shadowrun videos before, especially when I was talking about the UCAS, that they are really their own thing at this point in time. They don't like being compared to the old Civil War moniker of a Confederate. At least nowadays. It's kind of an insult, kind of unintended by a lot of people, because, yes, it is the Southern nation succeeding again, but it's a lot of different reasons now. Like, effectively, Canada joining the U.S. as what was left of, which was a big population center of Canada. The amount of stuff that gained Canada was technically a lot of its population centers. It's not surprising to say that a huge population joined from the little bits of Canada that joined the UCAS. But a lot of the stuff and the breaking away, the borders, a lot of the things that were going on basically drove them to their independence. And we can talk about it a lot more. But effectively, 2032, they become independent. There's some issues that they have. They still have skirmishes with Aslant. And, their capital is Atlanta. We'll talk about them more, too, in the future. I do want to kind of dive into them. Because they are an interesting one, to say the least. Let's talk about the Front Range Free Zone, though, a little bit here. It's another one I will dive into a little more in depth, which is, well, Denver. That's what it's known as now. And there is a Council of Denver. Denver was made the city of the treaty, where the Native American nations and the United States at the time kind of divided up things, where the territories become that. It became known as the Front Range Free Zone, and it's technically a sovereign state. It has influence from the Council of Denver, which is representatives of people from the various nations around the area. But Ghostwalker, one of the great dragons, basically moved in 2061 and kind of took over. So, I mean, that's the best thing. There's more to talk about with this entire thing, because the history of Denver and what it became is a very interesting one. And there are things that I want to talk about in the future that are related to this. Like some of the problems that have occurred in this area, in the Front Range Free Zone, are because, well, I can point out Ghostwalker and the Great Dragons, and I can talk about the Great Dragons because Ghostwalker appeared in 2061 out of the Washington Rift, created by assassinating Dragon President Dunkelzin, and, him moving in and basically taking over. But also, 2074, he had a massive battle with an immortal elf, Harlequin, who's a immortal elf who's its own problem. Immortal elves are something I'm going to have to talk about, because two of them got into a battle, and, a lot of shit happened because of that. So there's a lot to talk about in Denver, and to go in depth about that a little bit more. And that's another one we will visit again. But just know, it is an independent city that's sort of run by a council of people from North America, but also run by a big old dragon who sits on top of it. Only about 3 million people in that area. Now, let's talk about a nation which did break away relatively early in the U.S. time. In 2017, the Kingdom of Hawaii. Everybody loves Hawaii. It's a parliamentary monarchy, succeeded from the U.S. Effectively, we look through Hawaii's history up into the 90s, and it's the same history that we know about. But in the 1990s, the Hawaii for Hawaii movement basically started, and after a lot of, shit started going down, getting into the 2000s, in the Sixth World, the secession movement actually became a lot more powerful. The Army of Liberation of Hawaii did a bunch of car bombings to U.S. military aspects. There was martial law. And then Danforth Ho, who was a direct descendant of King Kamehameha III, who was technically the one of the previous kings of Hawaii during the First Kingdom of it, basically took on the name King Kamehameha IV and declared themselves a sovereign nation, the Kingdom of Hawaii. U.S. kind of opposed this, but by 2017, by the end of the year, because this was in August, the U.S. accepts Hawaiian independence. Haleakala on Maui goes into eruption. It's discovered to be an echo of the Great Ghost Dance. Gordon Ho is born. The Kamehameha IV dies. His son Gordon becomes Kamehameha V, He straps down, his son becomes the new one, Kamehameha VI. He dies at sea, and in 2067, Kamehameha V retakes the throne. So currently, it's unknown who's going to be the next ruler after that. But it's Hawaii. It's Hawaii, Maui, Kaho'olawe, Lanai, Molokai, Oahu. I'm going to butcher these. I'm not good at these. Konai, Ni Ohai. It's the islands of Hawaii. It's the basic way to say it. And Hawaii, this big island, still exists. It's still the capital of it. I think Honolulu is still the major group there. Yeah. So, again, Anglo-American, Asian, and Polynesian ethnicities are still pretty high, with some Hispanic. English, Japanese, and Hawaii are the major spoken languages, and the Nuyen is technically just the currency there. They've kept it simple there. They didn't come up with their own one. Again, they're in the middle of the Pacific, so they don't really have a lot of threats necessarily. So they've kept themselves, so they're a small nation that can survive on its own at this point in time. Now, as we're going alphabetically through these, let's dive into the Native American nations as a whole and as an individual, because there are currently 6 members of the Native American nations that actually exist. 2 don't really, sort of. We'll talk about that because, yeah, some things have changed when it comes to the setup of the Native American nations. Some groups have left, like the Transpolar Aleut Nation is no longer part of it. I'll talk about them in a little bit. Others have disappeared, as I talked about when we were showing the thing where like there was some that have merged in with others as they are now. The Ute Nation being absorbed by the Pueblo Corporate Council. So, the Native American nations is a union of these different countries in North America. The Treaty of Denver was created on them. It's governed by a sovereign tribal council that basically each of these individual nations has a representative on it that manages their group as a whole. Again, it's another kind of confederacy of different groups. Things like the Ute Nation dissolved because of a lot of issues. Tatamishan Nation left, but then had to come back because of things that were going on to in protectorate status. The Transpolar Aleut Nation left and has been successful at leaving. We'll talk about them. But, again, it's shifted around a lot. And I think the only nation I really want to do more in-depth than any of these is the Pueblo Corporate Council, because it is the most interesting out of all of them, I think, when it comes to going into depth. Not that they aren't all interesting, but a lot of stuff that's going on in them is very interesting. So, this is the Algonquin Manitou Council. So, it was really just the Algonquin Council that was formed as part of the Treaty of Denver. But a elf shaman named Adrian Silvermoon basically established the Manitou tribe within the territory, and the Algonquin Council recognized them and basically became the Algonquin Manitou. Since then, there have been a lot of issues that have gone as technology gained some influence when there were some crop failures. Silvermoon had a lot of political opponents that tried to oust them. Eventually died in mysterious circumstances. Derek Hysoon had a lot of opposition. Silvermoon died under mysterious circumstances. Then there was a coup against it that apparently when a spirit that she summoned turned against her. She died in 2051. Then there was a terrorist bombing in an Aztechnology building in 2061 that killed a bunch of important people. An anti-Manitou movement started growing. Then there was a bunch of leaders turned up dead in 2061 in an incident. Also in 2061, then the surviving Manitou leaders basically had a meeting at the Lynn Great Lodge. After the third day, media and non-elven persons were excluded, and they had a secret meeting in 2062. In May 1st, they declared they don't acknowledge the Algonquin Council's authority, and they claimed all lands north of Churchill River. We don't know how this is going to resolve itself. This is stuff that hasn't been revealed in 6th edition as of now. But basically, for nearly 20 years, these two tribes, the original tribe that took it over as part of the treaty and this elven tribe that was in that area, were at peace until things basically broke down very rapidly between the two of them, and now they're kind of at odds with each other. They have a very simple triumvirate of chiefs, a civil chief, a war chief, and a ceremonial chief. They all agree on the national policy. I can give you the names as of 2063. Joseph Bear for civil, Dox Tador for war chief, and Alara Hawksford for ceremonial chief on her 5th term. Joseph Bear is the son of Bobby Bear. It's a hereditary position for civil chief. A lot of police and law enforcement subcross contracted to Long Arms, but they do work well with as technology, with a database of terrorist activity, security, and weapons. And, of course, Calgary, Churchill, Fort Albany, Grand Rapids, Lynn Lake, Regina, Scotatoon, Thunder Bay are all major cities within their territory. And, yeah, the major corporation tends to be as technology because of a lot of things there. So they might have some stuff adapting as it goes. Now, unfortunately, I could not find a good thing, so I just have this map showing off the Baskin Council there, next to the nation we just talked about, the Algonquin Manitou Council. But you can see them right there. I didn't find their flag. Couldn't find it. But this is the Athabaskan Council. So, again, Athabaskan oil came about in the 2020s, and they had a possession of all oil fields within their territory. Then they got sea wolves. Their councils was actually one of the first to recognize Sasquatch as sentient beings in 2040. Iris firmware develops a series of redundant relays, satellites, and microwave links to easily access matrix across their nation. In June 18th of 2048, Athabaskan Oil reopens the Trans-Baskin Pipeline, formerly the Alaskan Pipeline, after a year of work. And astral space becomes visible around the Hardingberg ice field in 2061. So, as much as tribal nations have gone, they're pretty quiet here. You know, things have happened, but nothing major? I guess that's a way to talk about it. Like a lot of Native American nations, only tribal affiliated citizens can run or for office or even vote. Though, because there is an Anglo majority in this territory, there is a lot of people who go out of their way to meet Anglo majority's demands. So this is one of those areas that has a very large population of basically people that didn't leave when the Native Americans takes over. Because again, like, they were okay with becoming second-class citizens and stuff, but because they still out-majority a lot of the Native American, the tribal individuals, there is this, like, kind of ability to, like, you know, look after the special interests that are there. You know, they are a portion of your nation, as though they can't vote, you do want to keep them in line, in a way. So look after them. Like, you know, I think it's a popularity of, like, you know, keeping the people that outnumber you from getting really pissed off at you and basically honestly overthrowing you. Because the advantage that a lot of the Native Americans had, aka magic, is now with everybody. So honestly, you got to do what you got to do. So there's a lower council and upper council here. The lower council has 2 delegates per electoral zone. Upper council representatives are elected from most votes in a general ballot. They each sends 10 delegates to a grand council. An elected governor runs the grand council for 5-year terms. and also appoints 10 more representatives to sit on the Grand Council. The current governor, as of 2063, is Chief Delis Skyseeker of the Athena tribe. And there are no political parties. They're illegal there. So this is a lot of Western Canada and Alaska. It is not as cold as the Transpolar Aleut Nation, but there's like 6 months of snow every year. So, you know, electrical storms, snowy blizzards, not a lot of roads. Anchorage, Edmonton, Fairbanks, and Nome are major cities in the region. There's a lot of mountain ranges. It's basically, you know, again, Western Canada and Alaska. They're got their things going on there. Now, one that I will dive into even more in depth in the future is our good friends, the Pueblo Corporate Council. Because to summarize what happened with them, which is a very interesting thing, and their major cities are Albuquerque, as of 2070, Albuquerque, Flagstaff, Gallup, Las Vegas, Los Angeles, Phoenix, Pueblo, and Salt Lake City, and Santa Fe. So it's a lot of Southern California, Colorado, New Mexico, parts of Arizona, Southern California. Okay. So when they got control of their territory after everything happened, they kind of took a look at what was going on and decided, basically, rather than form a traditional tribal government, what they did is they incorporated their entire nation and made all the citizens basically shareholders. That's the easiest way to describe what they did. Yeah. Again, there's a little bit more to the entire thing that happened there, but we'll have to dive more in depth in another video because this is a very interesting nation and they have a pretty deep history. Things like they've now absorbed part of the Ute Nation, a lot of Southern California after what kind of stuff was happening there. There's a lot of stuff that has happened there, and it is a major nation in a lot of power. As when it comes to, because Pueblo is both a sovereign state and a for-profit corporation. There's preferred and residential stock, just to kind of mend that down. It actually does control a Denver sector. It has the Zuni and the Hopi are two of the major tribes. The minority tribes are the Alcoma, Laguna, Yaqui, and Zia. And there's a lot more to talk about with the Pueblo Corporate Council. Because of all the Native American nations, they are probably the strongest, honestly. It is also the most friendly toward Anglos. As much as, like, you know, I talked about how the Baskin Council basically placates their Anglo people in their territory a lot of times, the Pueblo Council is just actually friendly. They have an alliance with the CAS. Why is one of those reasons? Well, guess who's neighbor to both of them? Aslant. And Aslant is aggressive. So, of course, they're in an alliance with CAS that if something happens, you know, and they have very deep ties with a lot of their neighbor nations and stuff like that. The Pueblo Corporate Council is probably, of all the Native American nations, I would call it the strongest of them all. Honestly, becoming corporate nation really helped them a lot. It's also probably one of the most technologically advanced nations in the planet. That's an important thing to talk about, the Pueblo Corporate Council. When it comes to technology, they are a huge front runner. I will have to do a video just on them in the future to kind of dive deep into them because they are such an interesting group to talk about. Anyway, there's a tiny map, a tiny flag here for the South Shide Council. So, they've got the Free City of Seattle in the middle of them, of course. Their major cities are Aberdeen, Bellingham, Boise, Idaho Falls, Missoula, Spokane, Vancouver, Victoria, Walla Walla, Yakima, Olympia, Spokane. There's 2 Spokanes? I wonder if there are different Spokanes on here, on this list here. No, they're the same. They mentioned it twice. Just why? So, they originally opened their border to metahumans. The Sin Search tribe was formed. A group of the Sin Search elves succeeded to form the nation of Tir Tarnanog, which, if you recall, is above California. But when I had the map earlier, that was part of the South Seas territory that Tir Tarnagir formed out of. So they succeeded away. They had conflict with Tasmine. The Tasmine nation is now the Tasmine Protectorate. Basically, they had succeeded away from the Native American nations. I'll talk about that in a minute. There was conflict with South Shide. They had some battles with them. Eventually, they did have a ceasefire, but it was broken. Eventually, though, Tasmine had their corporate support withdraw. The Misuhama Computer Technologies withdrew their support of them, and it kind of left them in a very weakened area. And that's when South Seas, unlike with the Pablo Corporate Council absorbing the Ute Nation, they instead created the Tasmine Protectorate. Basically, they're semi-independent at this point in time. I'll talk about this in a minute. But they are also a very highly tribal-oriented population. Populations and politics segregated according to tribal affiliations. Each sends a representative to a tribal council. There are a few nationwide civil laws and restrictions. Other than that, each of the tribes within its territory is basically autonomous and self-governing. So, so they're very on your own thing. The Salish, the Macaw, the Cascade Crow, the Sin Search, the Cascade Orc, the Coda, and the Musqueam, Squamish, and what they call pink skin tribes are among the members that each have a kind of representative in this group here, in this council here, and how they work. The Sioux Nation. I'm probably butchering that name. I butcher a lot of stuff when it comes to pronouncing it. There's rumors of interaction with Ares. Honestly, there isn't a lot to say here about the Sioux Nation. Capital Cheyenne. Very similar to a lot of other places. There isn't a lot that happens here to some other places. Like, this is another one of the ones. I can mention a couple of locations. I can mention a little bit of information. But a lot of what's going on here is very simple. And you'd have to check the... There are a couple of books. The Native American Nations, Volumes 1. I think there's a Volumes 1 and a Volumes 2. Volumes 1 has some pages on the Sioux Nation. That is where you would probably want to dive into depths about this. There are definitely 2 books here that I would recommend checking out. But that's the thing for diving deep into them. These are old books, though. That's the only thing about them. They are very old books. They will not have stuff up to date. There hasn't been a new book. It might be both of them, honestly. Let me check the North American map. No, I want the other North American map. That one. No, it wouldn't be the Dakotas. The Dakotas would be in... Technically... Where's North and South Dakota on this map? Those? Oh, give me a second. Anyway, so... what was I saying? So yeah, the Sioux Nation, there isn't a lot of up-to-date stuff, but there are a couple of old 1st and 2nd edition books for the Native American nations. I'd recommend checking those out if you want to dive into earlier stuff based on them. Again, this is like decades old for 6th edition, but that would be a kind of update from basic information. And then, of course, the last of the Native American nations, the Tashima Nation, which did break away, of course, as we've talked about. Basically, Nishihime Computer Technologies basically was plundering the territory and supporting them in their battle against South Shish, and when they withdrew, the government and economy basically broke apart. And South Shish basically saw that as an excuse to gain some territory back effectively, because they lost a whole bunch of territory when Tarnagare broke away from them. So making it a Salish protectorate was a great way to replenish their territory. Yep. And that's not far enough north. I don't see any major cities in there off the top of my head, but they're kind of sandwiched in between the Salishi's Council and Algonquin Council. So they're kind of like up on the still western Canada border, but in an area that I'm sure there are major cities, but I don't know any off the top of my head. Again, I would recommend you look into the Native American nations books, any of them. Oh, sorry, I didn't flip over. There's the map of North America. With that, I can't. It's so small. I can almost read that one. I think I can find a bigger picture of this for myself to do that. But there are the Native American Nations volumes 1 and 2, and there was a Native American Nations book 2. So those are all recommended to check out there. Kitimat and Prince George are the Territorial Protectorate. Yeah. So there you go. And I can tell you, Bellingham is capital of South Shish Council. Cheyenne, capital of Sioux. Pablo Corporate Council is Santa Fe. The Algonquin Manitou Council is Saskatoon. The capital of the Baskin Council is probably one of the Canadian, Alaska ones. I don't have it on the map that I'm looking at here, but I found another copy of that map there. And then we move on to here, because we have a couple of non-Native American nations still to talk about before we're done today. We have 4 more nations to mention. Well, 2 of which doesn't have a lot, but this is the Republic of Quebec. So. Yeah, Quebec broke away from Canada. I mean, that's a big thing to tell you about it. This is one that I definitely considered a little bit more of a deep dive, but I don't think there's enough to really do that. In honesty, in 2010, they succeeded from Canada. French became their official language and only legal business language. The thing about this is Quebec... the Republic of Quebec wasn't part of the Treaty of Denver. Basically, in the 8 years since they seceded from Canada, they had close ties with Native Americans. Okay, I'm busy. I'll be done when I'm done. Yep, I knew. Got your message. Anyway. They hoped to protect them from reprisal, and honestly, they were correct. They didn't have to participate in the Treaty of Denver. They, as considering themselves kind of almost like, I don't know if you could call them like, they broke away as they felt like not connected with Canada as a whole of their own for various other regions. They kept on good relations with the Native American nations and weren't part of the Treaty of Denver. They didn't need to be. When globalization occurred, they extended full rights to Francophone metahumans. Anglophone metahumans were left out. Basically, if you are French-Canadian, you have better rights in Quebec than if you're non-French Canadian. Turns out that that's a thing. One of the things that they have is in 2021 they did the Harmful Para-Animals Act. Basically rewards for hunting certain types of para-animals that are considered dangerous. It has been amended a couple of times. The main time it was amended was in 2061, where it amended the legal status of surged victims and had a surge of species to the bounty list and removed dragons from the list. So dragons are no longer on their harmful paranormal act. Took them 40 years. The Democrat Monday's party became dominant in 2061 after 50 years of the pro-Francophone Parti Québécois being in charge. So basically, there was 50 years since they've succeeded away of one party being basically in charge. But in 2061, another party became the dominant party, so better politics. And in 2062, the Republic of Quebec is now, as of then, open to tourist trade immigrants under the La Ville des Loirs, the Awakening of the Bear movement in the government. And English is in a trial period as a legal business language in 2062. So they've opened up that basically because, honestly, there are still English, Spanish, and Japanese, I think, are the major global languages in the Sixth World. There are a couple others that are pretty big languages, but those are the ones I could mention off the top of my head for various regions and various reasons. English has had a huge influence because originally the U.S., and it still was, even with the U.S. kind of breaking apart, its influence is still heavy. Japanese, because they've grown in a lot of power in the, Asian circuit. And, of course, South America and, that influence of a lot of Spanish, but that has also kind of moved away through more native stuff and things like that. Anyway. So, Quebec, of course, has its various parties. It's a socialist republic. It's held by a National Assembly of Quebec, which consists of 125 feet. President is elected every 6 years by the people. The Quebec Unite is a group which wants to join Quebec with the UCIS. So it is a political movement there, that there is a group that's like, we've been doing okay as our own thing, but we can join with our neighbors here and be like an important part and kind of improve things, Their legal system's based on the Napoleonic Code, military contracts with Michigan from drones, Cross-Applied Technology is one of the major companies there. Capital is Quebec City, and current president is President Claude Amé. Anyway. Let's talk a couple more nations to talk about here, and of course, let's talk about. I couldn't find a flag for it, so Tir Natinak. It's got this. This is a book. Thanks, first, second edition, frickin' Shadowrun. Thanks. So this is the Elven nation that broke away from the South Shide Council to form their own one. They control a lot of Oregon, slices of Nevada, and they have a contested territory in Northern California that they've basically kind of taken over. They have Portland, Salem, and Eugene. And Portland is actually known as Carissir in Seferial, the Elven language. That's what it's also called now. It came about in 2035, so it's been around for a bit. There's another one I do want to break into a little bit more because there is some more to talk about with this one as they've done some things various here. But other notes are the Great Dragon Hesterby layers on Mount Shasta. But I do want to dive into this in Elven nations as a power. It's one of the two tier nations, the two Elven nations. So we will have to talk about these more, basically. It's a council of princes that was established to run it. Anyway. The Council of Princes is kind of broken apart, replaced by a High Council. Their government has kind of changed over a little bit. And they have a peace force, which isn't always peaceful. And a caste system, which we'll have to talk about. There's a lot to talk about with this one, so I will do its own video on Tir Terninger, the Elven nation. But let's talk about a nation which is not just in North America. So I think that's an important one to talk about. because here is a picture of the entire thing as it includes Iceland, Greenland, and parts of what was formerly Russia in the north, and all of northern the North Pole. It is the Transpolar Aleut Nation. It's a federal constitutional republic. Capital is Inuvik. President Ragnars and Vice President Skorskjon are in charge of it right now. Greenland's been renamed Thule. Iceland's renamed Thule Protectorate. Basically, Iceland's economy collapsed during the crash of 29 and basically became a protectorate to pay off its debts. So it contains Iceland, the Great Dragon, Ferishvinj, layers in Iceland. It doesn't have a lot of mafia influence. Saderkrupp does have some presence in the Arctic. There's a lot about this one. Again, this is another one that has not a lot of information. Native American Nations Volume 2, I recommend having some things about this because, again, it's still first edition, but it will have a little bit of what you're talking about. There are other books that I could probably throw you in to have little bits here and there, but it's an unfortunate thing that there isn't a lot on this nation either when it comes to information. For diving into super depth of it. It is basically the nation at the North Pole. That's the best way to think about it. It is the northernmost nation. It's on its own. It does its own thing. And finally, one other... Did I not talk about... Oh, I will mention UCIS. I forgot to mention. I've talked about them in their own video. You can go check that out now. But the United Canadian American States, I went through in depth about them. They're in North America here. I'd say check that video out to hear about them. Certainly. Jokingly there. But the Yucatan, which is very new, as its own kind of thing. We don't know a lot about what's going on here other than it's technically broken away from Astland. We know that. What it entails, hard to say. Effectively, when Astland had some issues, they basically, in the 2050s, there were some rebellions, some things that were going on, and attempts to basically free the Yucatan. In Yucatan, there was a slash and burn that kind of went in there because there was some troops, because this was the time that Aslan was kicked out of Denver. A Ghostwalker. That's a little bit of Denver history. So they had extra troops. They sent in there, but in March 15th of 2062, there was earthquakes, tidal waves, storms that hit the Yucatan, and effectively the ongoing Aslan offensive was hit by this more than the Yucatan people. It was a warfare between nature and toxic spirits. Basically, the people that were there waited for this. They kind of waited things to die down. And so it's not like they've been truly defeated and there's still problems going on there, but the Yucatan is kind of on its own now. It's a contested zone that 2075, because the last date we have information on it is 2062, we don't have an update on this particular region since then. So, again, it's one of these things that with each edition of the game taking different time periods, we do pick up on these different regions, but sometimes when we know things are happening, we don't always get all the information and picture of really the full what's going on. The Yucatan, as of 2072, on maps, that 2072 map that I showed off, which we can go back to, is it this one? No, it's this one, shows the Yucatan as an independent nation. Excuse me. It shows it with Meridia at its forefront. So we know in the last 10 years, they have a level of autonomy. We also know there's some disputed zones, but with the Political Council in Aslan, Tirnanog and California, and of course Aslan and Amazonia. A lot of things going on with there. But we know in 2072, on an official map, that the Yucatan is independent. What does this mean? Who the hell knows? I think that's the issue, is we don't really know what that means for the Yucatan. Our last time that we have official reports about what was going on was 2062. So in those 10 years, they gained independence. How, why, what happened? Not information that any book has told. Certainly, as a new nation, you can imagine the kind of area and things that are going on there, and a lot of stuff. There's so much that could be used for a lot of these places that, honestly, we don't have a lot of information on them. We have some, but, like, talking about some of these places, we haven't heard a lot about them since first edition or second edition books. We don't get a lot of updates. So these are nations that exist here, but we just don't have a lot. And this is North America. There are so many other nations in the world that I'll have to go over a lot of these, which I will have more in-depth lists, more continents that I'll review, but plenty of them we just don't have a lot on. We know they're a nation. We have basics on them. But what does that mean for them? Who knows? We don't know. We just don't. Anyway, I thought this was an interesting exploration on, of course, North America, the countries of North America in the Sixth World of Shadowrun, and kind of pointing towards 2075. Again, this map here, which I will say, it's in PDF form. You can get it on the Shadowrun North American Wiki if you want to see this and be able to like zoom in and stuff on it for a little bit better details on some of the nations and cities that are important in these areas. This is probably, other than the time-lapse image, shows the best out of what's going on here. And I do recommend these as ways of like checking out, learning stuff, seeing stuff, learning a little bit about what's going on in North America. And as I said, a bunch of these nations I will go into more depth about. I am going to be picking up these old books that I have PDFs of, which I do have a good chunk of them that I do. I'm going to be looking through them. I'm going to be using that to give you some extra information on those. So expect in the future things like Aslan, California Free State, the CAS, the place formerly known as Denver, the Pablo Corporate Council, Tirnatog, all to get a little bit more in depth about them, because I feel like all these places have to be visited, and we'll do more other continents. I don't know if I want to do all the continents first and then dive into the nations, kind of like when I've got a larger list. I haven't decided. I'll figure it out. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed learning about this. It's definitely a really cool thing to learn about these places in North America and how they've changed with everything over this time period. You see a lot of that there is some of the same stuff that has always existed in North America and a lot of parts of the world, but a lot of things have also changed, and the massive changes in governments and things and different ways people have tried things since the upheavals that have occurred, since the chaos that's occurred across the world that have caused so many issues. I talked a lot about this kind of stuff with the UCAS video, but certainly see it more here. So we'll do more visits to the Shadowrun world, to Sixth World, learn more about it, and check out more places. I might do the continental tour first before I go into individual nations some more, because this is kind of fun. But thank you for joining. Every Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, I live stream this on Twitch. So if you're joining me on Twitch, hi, welcome. If you're joining me on YouTube, hey, you could join me live. You could. Remember, if you're on YouTube, though, subscribe, subscribe, like, ring the bell, leave a comment, things like that. if you've used any of these nations other than like the UCS or honestly Seattle, any of these other places in a Shadowrun game, let me know. That's really interesting. If you're joining me on Twitch, hey, at least I'll have a follow. You know, that's a great way to support. I am on social media, Discord, and the place formerly known as Twitter. I'm not gonna call it X. That's an issue for totally other me. Yeah, I think that's all the shout-outs. I'll see you next time I do this on Twitch, or next time you see something on YouTube. Farewell, everybody. Have a good one. And farewell.